Well, hello everybody. I'm doing a presentation on video conferencing education. This is the project between Michelle Johnson and myself, Edgar Salmingo. And I wanted to do a quick overview of the research and the things that we found about video conferencing and its developments in education. First of all, we looked at the current state. Three big things that we found was that video conferencing technologies, especially in the last 2-3 years, have been increasingly available, maybe because of the increase of laptops, affordability. We now have smartphones like iPhones and Androids that have video conferencing capabilities, and the proliferation of high-speed internet and free applications just like Skype. It also has been emerging as an educational media, but there's not that much research on it. As a matter of fact, the research that I found was only within the last 2 years. And it shows great promise, though in every research they all mention its limitations. So just to give a brief outline of what this video is going to entail, we found a literature review, so we're going to talk about that. The primary uses in the research that we found for video conferencing, some of the criticisms about video conferencing, some of the critical reviews and articles about it, and then we're going to go over two different applications, one Skype in the classroom, another one Global Nomads. So the review, this one's by Lawson, 2010, and it was pretty much a good overview and background information about what we were doing. Some of the highlights were that it outlined the many uses of video conferencing. They noticed that most of the research is just case studies describing the experience rather than talking about what is necessary to be effective. They noticed that pedagogy should drive the use of video conferencing and not vice versa. And again, this was an emerging technology, so they say there should be more funding and innovation. So because it's supposed to be a short presentation, I'm going to go over some of the primary uses very quickly. Distance learning, language learning, we actually found a lot on medical applications, teacher education, and then also enhancing the education that already exists. First one by Michaels and Chang. This one is a university in the Midwest, and they talked about in their case study that they're able to get guest speakers or authors of the books they're reading that they would normally not be able to do, but we're now able to because of Skype. One by Wilkie, this is an article in 2011, and they talked about how students in Australia were able to get their educational needs met even though some of them were chronically ill or had significant absences. And they showed that they did pretty well. They just don't know what's the best mode, if video conferencing is the best mode, but they did show some increases in student performance even though these were pupils that were constantly out. In terms of international use, this one they were talking about social work students that they say 1 in 5 students in social work is abroad, and previously it was very difficult to communicate. They concluded that for most social work students abroad, they felt isolated and alone, and this helped ease those fears. It's not perfect in terms of reliability, but they noticed that it was pretty good. Held. They did a project in terms of Skyping science between a classroom in Shanghai and one in Chicago, and they connected 11th grade physics lessons. It gave both cultures some perspective, some motivation to learn some of the physics. They concluded it was all positive, amazing outcomes. Some of the drawbacks, the time difference was a little bit challenging, and also finding partners, but they want to continue doing it. They said that maybe they can do side-by-side physics projects and see if the results are still the same. And lastly, in terms of distance learning, we're talking about students that are already studying abroad. Most universities offer a study abroad program, and they're saying that because of Skype and video conferencing, the boundaries or the limitations of people wanting to travel overseas and study abroad is dissipated because now they could video conference back home. The second primary use was acquiring second language. So a couple articles that we found. First one's by Elia in 2006. She found her study was about tandem learning between Italy or Italian schools and English schools and their native speakers. They found that there was more opportunities for discussions and they could make partner portfolios. They concluded that this is the next wave of technology. I mean, we moved from CDs to DVDs or VHS and DVDs, and they want to move towards video conferencing and maybe even make mini radio stations between Italian and English students. White in 2011 studied French primary schools and followed 6 primary teachers. Again, it says they found advantages to teaching foreign language through video conferencing, but they found that sometimes teachers struggle with lessons. They prefer, spontaneous conversation, but they very rarely have opportunities for that, and they mostly planned out every single lesson, and ideally they'd rather have it more spontaneous. A study by Developed, Guichan, and Vincent in France, they noticed or explored the effectiveness of webcams, and they noticed that as the use of the webcam went up, interpersonal relationships, effectiveness in the classroom, they also increased. Again, I told you we found a lot of information about medical applications, so I'm going to run through a few of them with you. Clinical practical exams. This was a study done by Birch and other researchers in 2007 in the University of Vermont. They studied 52 med students, and they did a crossover design where half the students did face-to-face and half the students did video conferencing, and then halfway through the year they switched. And they noticed that their performance in the exams were pretty much the same, so they're hypothesizing that maybe you'll need to have face-to-face classes anymore. This one is for this is a study in Nova Scotia by Allen and Fleming. They noticed that 31 learners, after doing the video conferencing, actually had a knowledge gain by video conferencing as opposed to face-to-face. They warned people that it was a small sample size. It was very costly, but the doctors that participated were more likely to make practice changes because of the video conferencing. This one is one from Penn State College of Medicine in 2011, very recent. They used Skype to connect experts from different states. It improved teacher-student communication. The students were highly motivated, and they gave high ratings for it. And the last one for medical application, stroke assessment training. They gave this training both in face-to-face and video conferencing, and they noticed that the exam performance was pretty much the same. In terms of teacher education, special ed teacher training, they did essentially they need some sort of supervision for student teachers or those wanting to be a special ed teacher, but I guess it's very time intensive for supervisors and master teachers to come out and observe them. So they're hypothesizing that maybe they could do video conferencing observations. And they found by their own assessment tool that it was just as reliable as being observing face-to-face. They could just do observations via video conferencing. Another article we found was by Helen Williams, and hers was more of an informational article that said that more and more programs or grad and undergrad programs are switching to new media such as Skype, and warning that other programs, teacher education programs that don't switch to this model might be obsolete. And lastly, for teacher education, this one's by Dooley. Again, this was November 2011, so very recent. Based out of Spain, noticed that a year-long study between student teachers in Spain and the United States were observed. And they used Skype, they used Moodle, they used VoiceThread, they used Second Life. They noticed, well, they didn't have a conclusion. They just wanted to see how this looked like. And they're merely exploring new modes of communication and intercultural space. And they found that both students from Spain and the United States had preferable or favorable reviews of the exchange. There was not much other than that. And then in terms of improving existing education, one article in 2010 by Cohen and Burkhardt, they outlined a Skype-based library reference service where students that studied abroad could take advantage of. What was the killer app was that they were allowed to do screen sharing via Skype. So students that took advantage of it expressed that they got more comprehensive help because a librarian could literally go through their computer and guide them. Some still preferred email or IM, but in general, those that did Skype tend to have a better rapport with the librarian, and it was found to be cheap or not as just as expensive as their traditional methods of library reference services. And then office hours, I mean, we're accustomed to this at Pepperdine as well, but this article by Rivera and Kovac was an overview of just effective technologies. They talked about the advantages and disadvantages of Skype. They say that it provides more communication, but there's a lot of setup and tech support needed. So after all of that, we could look at some of the criticisms that some have of video conferencing. There's 3 articles that we found. One was by Giesbers in 2009 and et al. And they found that video conferencing and regular online learning, like discussion boards, had the same learning satisfaction. So their their whole conclusion was that the satisfaction, the learners were just as happy with discussion boards as opposed to video conferencing. Yang and Chang in I believe this is Taiwan, they noticed that when they used Skype to try to improve their English proficiency, that there was no enhancement by improving or including, video conferencing. They used two classes. One class barely used Skype as more of an optional basis, and one class used it heavily. They had five one-hour discussions every 3 weeks, and between these two classes, the English proficiency was about the same. And lastly, and this is for some of us that work in tech support, is the most common criticism of video conferencing, that it requires a lot of heavy planning and you need a lot of support and infrastructure to make this work. So this one was about nursing courses, and all that glitters is not gold. So all in all, they said it helped communication, but the amount of support and advanced planning was really needed. So that was the literature review that we found. We both observed or looked at two different applications. The one I looked at was Skype. Skype normally was a telephony company or voice over IP company where people can connect across the world internationally and not pay so much as opposed to long distance calling. But just in March of this year, they opened Skype in the Classroom, and this is an article by the Journal, and they said that it's a free service where this actually existed through third parties before, but Skype itself created a collaborative space for teachers and educators to interact and find each other. In terms of current updates, this is just December 14th, so just a week ago, or less than a week ago, almost a couple days ago, they reached the 20,000 mark for teachers linked to Skype in the Classroom. And I myself, about a couple weeks ago or a month ago, opened my own collaborative project. I teach an AP Environmental Science class, so I was looking for any environmental science classes around the world that wanted to connect. I mentioned this in one of our Illuminate classes, that our environment experience is very limited. I mean, we're very fortunate we have the beach and the mountains, but other than that, we have no other experience with ecosystems. And within a day, I was able to connect with a couple of schools in Canada. I found one that was doing essentially extensive study of the oil drilling in Canada, and they need help with biology, so we could connect. They have an 8th grade class, and maybe we could connect information. And within the week that I posted it, I got 2 responses, one from a 6th grade class, one from an 8th grade class, but both of them looked very promising. And then Michelle is going to talk about her study of global nomads.